Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at a stack of notes and historical records that tell, frankly, one of the most impossible stories in human history. And I don't use that word lightly. I mean, if you pitch the script to Hollywood, they probably tell you to tone it down.
Oh, absolutely. They'd say nobody would believe it.
Exactly.
It really is that extreme. We're talking about a narrative that just breaks every single rule of the setting it takes place in.
Right.
Usually, history has a certain inertia to it. The rich stay rich, the powerful stay powerful. This story just takes a sledgehammer to that entire concept.
We're talking about feudal Japan. And just to set the stakes here for everyone listening, this wasn't a society where you could just, hustle your way to the top.
Not at all.
It was a caste system. If you were born a peasant, you died a peasant. If you were born a samurai, you carried the swords. I mean, the ceiling wasn't just glass. It was made of iron. You stayed in your lane.
Precisely. And yet, we have this figure, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a man who started with absolutely nothing. No money, no samurai lineage, not even a real surname.
Right.
He was born the son of a peasant foot soldier in Ashigaru, essentially a temp worker for the army.
Yeah.
And he ends up becoming the absolute ruler of the entire nation.
The Imperial Regent, the man who unified Japan.
It's staggering.
It's the ultimate underdog story, but as I was reading through these sources, I realized it's not just a rags to riches tale. It's a psychological thriller. It's about charm, ruthlessness, and a kind of tragic irony where the hero lives long enough to become the villain.
That's a very good way to put it.
So our mission today is to unpack how a sandal-bearer climbed to the top, the specific personality trait they call hitotarashi that got him there, and the brutal structures he built to keep anyone else from following in his footsteps.
To really understand Hideyoshi, though, you have to understand the mess he was born into. We call this the Sengoku period.
The Warring States period.
Exactly.
I always picture this as just absolute anarchy. Like Mad Max, but with katanas.
That's not far off. The central government, the Ashikaga shogunate, had completely collapsed in everything but name.
So a total power vacuum.
A huge one. Japan was fractured into dozens of little fiefdoms ruled by warlords called daimyo, and they were constantly at war with one another. It was a world defined by a concept called Gikkokuchu.
Gikkokuchu. That translates to the low overcoming the high, right?
It does. It refers to this social climate where subordinates were constantly trying to overthrow their lords. It was treacherous. It was bloody.
But that chaos was the key.
It was the only reason a man like Hideyoshi could rise at all. If the system had been working properly, he would have been a farmer his whole life, period. But because the system was broken, there were cracks he could slip through.
So let's go back to the start. The year is 1537. We are in Nakamura, which is near modern-day Nagoya, and a child is born.
His childhood name was Hiyoshimaru, and the sources are quite clear on his status. His father, Kinoshita Yaemon, was an Ashigaru.
And we need to be clear what that means. It's not a samurai.
Not even close. An Ashigaru is a peasant foot soldier. These are the guys with the spears standing in the mud. They are not the guys on the horses with the fancy armor.
Hired muscle.
That's all they were. And when his father died, Hideyoshi was only 7. The family was plunged into deep, deep poverty.
One of the sources, a writing by a monk named Ankokuji Akai, even notes that Hideyoshi had to beg on the streets at one point. That's a long, long way from the imperial palace.
Statistically, that's where his story should have ended. An impoverished peasant boy in the middle of a war zone usually ends up as a casualty statistic.
But he doesn't. He leaves home. There are all these legends that he was sent to a temple and he rejected it, that he was looking for adventure.
Right, but the real turning point, the one we can verify, comes in 1558. He joins the Oda clan.
The Oda clan, led by the one and only Oda Nobunaga. Now, Nobunaga is a legend in his own right. Ruthless, brilliant, ambitious.
The Demon King.
Right. And Hideyoshi joins his service as a servant, specifically a sandal-bearer.
It sounds like the most lowly job imaginable. Here are your shoes, my lord.
Yeah, totally.
But in the context of a warlord's household, being a sandal-bearer is actually a position of immense strategic value.
Because of proximity?
Exactly. You are physically close to the Lord. You're there when he's coming and going from meetings. You're hearing all the conversations. You're anticipating his needs.
Yeah, fly on the wall.
An incredibly useful fly on the wall. And Hideyoshi, who's called Tokichiro at this time, evidently made a huge impression. There's a very famous anecdote.
The warm sandals.
The warm sandals. That on cold winter mornings, he would keep Nobunaga sandals tucked inside his own robe against his chest so they would be warm when the Lord put them on.
That is some serious dedication. But it also speaks to his social intelligence. He knew he couldn't outfight the samurai yet, so he outserviced them.
He was playing a different game.
Although, reading the descriptions of him, he didn't exactly look the part of a future ruler. The sources mention his nicknames were, well, they were unkind.
Nobunaga was not known for his political correctness. He called Hideyoshi Kozaru Little Monkey, or just Saru Monkey.
And bald rat.
And bald rat, yes. Hideyoshi was apparently small, quite ugly by the standards of the time, and just hyper-energetic.
So you have this bald rat running around warming sandals, but clearly Nobunaga saw something else because he starts promoting him. And this is where you see that Hideyoshi wasn't just a brown-noser, he was an absolute genius. The first big aha moment in the records is the legend of Tsunemata Castle, the one-night castle.
This is a pivotal moment in the mythology of Hideyoshi. So the Oda clan was trying to attack the Saito clan in Mino province.
Okay.
But to get there, they needed a foothold, a base, across a major river, and it was a logistical nightmare. Every time Nobunaga's top generals tried to build a fort on the other side, the enemy would just cross the river and destroy it while it was half-built.
So Nobunaga's getting frustrated, the big shot generals are failing, and this sandal-bearer steps up and says, I can do it.
Right. And all the other generals are probably laughing at him. But the legend says he built it in one night.
In one night? How is that even possible?
Well, historians debate the exact timeline, but the mechanism is what's so brilliant. He didn't build a stone castle from scratch on the site. He prefabricated the walls and towers upstream.
Oh.
He had the timbers cut and fitted miles away, totally out of sight. Then, under the cover of darkness, he floated them down the river on rafts.
It's like an IKEA castle. He just had to assemble the parts on site.
Exactly. He turned a massive construction project into a simple assembly project. So when the sun came up, the enemy looks across the river, and yesterday there was a swamp.
And today, there's a fortress with banners flying.
Can you imagine the psychological impact of that? Must have been devastating. It's not just, oh, they built a fort. It's, we are fighting wizards.
It's black magic.
It is. It's psychological warfare as much as it is engineering. It secured the route to Mount Inaba. But what I find even more impressive, this goes to the core of who Hideyoshi was, is what happened next in 1564. He didn't just build forts. He built alliances. He somehow managed to convince the Mino warlords, the actual enemies, to defect to Nobunaga's side.
This is the negotiator side of him. We see him convincing the brilliant strategist Takanaka Shigeharu to switch sides. But wait, in samurai culture, isn't loyalty everything? How does a peasant talk a high-ranking samurai into betraying his lord?
That is the million-dollar question. And this brings us to that term you mentioned earlier, Hidetsugu.
Man seducer.
Or master charmer.
Yeah.
It's hard to translate perfectly. But Hideyoshi had this uncanny ability to read people, to figure out what they really wanted, whether it was money or security or just respect, and make them feel like following him was their own brilliant idea.
He wasn't the strongest warrior on the battlefield.
No, but he could talk a bird out of a tree. He used brains and bribery over just brawn.
He also had a lot of nerve. I mean, there's this detail about his name change that I found fascinating. He's rising in the ranks, and he decides Kinoshita to Kichiro just doesn't sound heavy enough, so he makes up a new surname.
It's a stroke of, like, corporate genius. He looks at Oda Nobunaga's two top generals, Niwa Nagahide and Shibata Katsui.
The big dog of the clan.
The biggest. So he takes a character from Niwa's name and a character from Shibata's name, and he combines them to create a new name, Hashiba.
Isn't that incredibly risky? He's basically stealing their brand identity. Wouldn't a guy like Shibata Katsui be offended by a peasant servant mashing up his name like that?
Oh, Katsui definitely hated it. He despised Hideyoshi for his entire life. But here's the genius part. Nobunaga loved it.
Of course he did.
It signaled to the boss, I respect the hierarchy. I am aligning myself with your top men. I am a team player. It flattered the generals publicly, while simultaneously and sneakily putting him in their league. It was a power move disguised as humility.
So he's the top lieutenant, he's the fixer, he's the guy Nobunaga sends to do the impossible, but he's still number 2. And then, in 1582, the entire board flips.
Hanaji.
The Hanaji incident.
This is the single most shocking moment in the Sengoku period. Oda Nobunaga is at the absolute height of his power, just on the verge of unifying all of Japan. He's staying at a temple in Kyoto called Hanuji, with just a small personal guard.
Right.
And one of his own generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, betrays him. He surrounds the temple in the middle of the night, sets it on fire, and Nobunaga commits seppuku.
The king is dead. The board is wide open. And where is our guy Hideyoshi when all this goes down?
He's in the worst possible place. He's hundreds of miles away in the west, besieging a castle called Takamatsu. He is literally waist-deep in a war with the powerful Nutri clan.
So he's totally stuck. His boss is dead. He's facing a massive enemy army in front of him. And the traitor who killed his boss is now sitting in the capital trying to consolidate power.
Most people would panic. They'd freeze. Hideyoshi acts with a terrifying, almost inhuman clarity.
What's the first move?
First, he keeps the news of Nobunaga's death a total secret. He intercepts the messengers so the Mori, his enemy, don't find out. Then he immediately goes to the Muchi and negotiates a peace treaty.
While they're still in the dark.
Exactly. He gives them incredibly generous terms just to get them to sign the paper now. He floods Takamatsu Castle to force a quick surrender, but spares the Lord's life in exchange for the castle. He just needs out.
He buys himself an exit.
Right. And the second the ink is dry, he turns his entire army around and begins a forced march back toward Kyoto. This is known in history as the Great Chugoku Retreat.
And I don't want to gloss over this. This is one of the greatest military feats in Japanese history.
Absolutely. We're talking about moving 20,000 men in full armor with horses, spears, and all their supplies over 200 kilometers.
And how long?
About a week. It was the rainy season. The roads were just mud.
How do you even feed 20,000 men moving that fast?
That's the logistical genius of Hideyoshi. He had sent advance runners ahead to every village along the route to buy up all the rice, to set up way stations. He had torches lit along the entire road so they could march through the night. He had rice balls cooked and waiting so soldiers could literally grab them and eat without breaking stride.
It was a nonstop sprint.
It was a triumph of logistics and sheer willpower. The soldiers were running on adrenaline and Hideyoshi's promise of vengeance.
And Akechi Mitsuhide, the traitor, has no idea this human freight train is bearing down on him.
Mitsuhide thought he had months to consolidate power. He was in Kyoto, trying to win over other allies, trying to get the emperor's blessing. Instead, just 13 days after he killed Nobunaga, he looks up and sees Hideyoshi's army at a place called Yamazaki.
And it becomes the Battle of Yamazaki.
It was over quickly. Hideyoshi had the numbers, the momentum, and the moral high ground.
This is the Avenger narrative, isn't it? He isn't just another general grabbing for power. He's the one who's punishing the ultimate traitor.
Exactly. By defeating Mitsuhide so quickly and decisively, he claimed Nobunaga's legacy. He legitimized himself as Nobunaga's spiritual successor. The actual biological sons of Nobunaga were completely sidelined because Hideyoshi was the one who did the work. He avenged their father.
But the old guard, the established samurai, they didn't just roll over for him. We mentioned Shibata Katsui earlier, the guy whose name Hideyoshi borrowed. He must have been furious.
He was livid. Katsui was one of Nobunaga's oldest and most respected generals. He represented the old-school samurai values. He looked at Hideyoshi and saw a jumped-up peasant upstart, a monkey.
So they had to fight it out?
They did. In 1583, at the Battle of Shizugatake, it was a showdown for control of the Oda clan's remnants, and Hideyoshi just crushed him. That effectively ended any serious internal resistance.
But there was one man left standing, the final boss, so to speak.
Tokugawa Ieyasu.
The man who would eventually become shogun and found a dynasty that lasts 250 years.
But at this point, Ieyasu is just another very powerful, very cunning rival warlord. They faced off in 1584. And this is interesting. Militarily, they fought to a stalemate.
Really?
Yeah, the Battle of Kamaki and Nagakute. Ieyasu was incredibly cautious and skilled. Hideyoshi realized that trying to crush Ieyasu on the battlefield would be a long, bloody affair that would bleed his own army dry.
So if you can't beat them on the field, you go back to being the Hitotorashi.
Back to the charm offensive, or maybe aggressive diplomacy. Hideyoshi tried everything. He offered land, he adopted one of Ieyasu's sons, but Ieyasu still wouldn't budge. He wouldn't come to Kyoto to formally submit.
So what was the final move?
Hideyoshi did something that sounds completely insane to modern ears. He sent his own mother and his younger sister to Ieyasu as hostages.
He sent his mom to the enemy camp.
He sent his mother, Mamenda Koro. It was a gesture of ultimate trust, or maybe ultimate desperation. He was effectively saying, I am so committed to peace between us, and I need your submission so badly that I will put my own mother in your hands. If I betray you, you can kill her.
That is a level of high-stakes poker that I can't even comprehend, but it worked.
It did. Ieyasu realized he couldn't refuse a gesture like that without looking like an unreasonable monster. He traveled to Kyoto and formally pledged his loyalty. With Ieyasu on board, Hideyoshi was, for all intents and purposes, the undisputed master of Japan.
But now he hits that iron ceiling we talked about in the intro. He's the most powerful man in the country, but he's still a peasant by birth. He wants to be shogun, but he can't, right? The rules are the rules.
The rules were the rules. Tradition held that the title of Sei Taishugen, the full title of shogun, could only be held by someone from the Minamoto clan lineage. Hideyoshi had no lineage. The court genealogists couldn't fudge that much history.
So he hacked the system.
He pivoted brilliantly. He decided if he couldn't be the supreme military dictator, the shogun, he would become the supreme civil dictator. To do that, he needed a noble pedigree. So he forced the ancient and noble Fujiwara clan to adopt him.
He got adopted again. First the name smash-up, now this.
Yes, he had himself adopted by a high-ranking court noble named Konoe Sakihisa. This suddenly gave him the pedigree he needed to take the title of Kampaku.
The Imperial Regent.
The Imperial Regent. This was a title usually reserved for the highest aristocrats who spoke for the emperor himself. No samurai had ever held it, and certainly no peasant. And then, as the final step, he gets the imperial court to grant him a brand new clan name, Toyotomi.
Abundant provider.
Abundant provider. So he isn't Hashiba the general anymore. He is Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the Imperial Regent of Japan. He's created his own dynasty out of thin air.
And this is where the story shifts, doesn't it? It goes from the rise to the reign. He starts reshaping the entire country. And this is where we see that huge tragic irony. This man who rose because the social classes were just fluid enough for him to climb through the cracks.
Decides to pour concrete over the whole system.
Pulling up the ladder behind him.
Exactly. The most famous policy is the sword hunt of 1588. But before we get to that, I want to connect it to something that sounds boring but is actually the secret to his power. The land surveys.
Right. The outline mentioned the Taikō Kenshi. To me, land survey sounds like boring bureaucracy. Why is it so important?
It's the key to everything. Because before Hideyoshi, land ownership and taxation were a complete mess. You had nobles, temples, and samurai all claiming rights to the same patch of dirt. Nobody knew exactly how much rice was being produced.
Which meant nobody knew how much tax could be collected.
Yeah, exactly. People were hiding income everywhere. So Hideyoshi implemented the Taikō Kenshi. He standardized the measuring cup, literally the little wood masu box used to measure rice. He sent his officials to every single village in Japan to measure the fields and assess their yield in a unit called a koku.
And one koku is what?
Roughly the amount of rice needed to feed one man for 1 year.
So he quantified the entire national economy.
He did. By knowing exactly what the land produced, he could extract the maximum, most efficient tax. And by tying the peasants to that specific land on the survey, he stopped them from moving around. Which brings us to the sword hunt.
He disarmed the entire populace.
He decreed that farmers were no longer allowed to own swords, spears, or guns, but he spun it brilliantly. He told them he needed the metal to build a giant statue of the great Buddha in Kyoto. He said, "Give up your weapon and you earn religious merit for the afterlife."
That is just so clever. It's not gun control. It's a religious donation.
But the real reason, of course, was to prevent peasant revolts.
Hmm.
He knew better than anyone that an armed peasantry creates instability. He was an armed peasant.
He wanted to ensure no other Hideyoshis could ever rise up again.
He froze the class structure solid. Samurai, farmer, artisan, merchant. If you were born a farmer, you stayed a farmer. Your son stayed a farmer, period.
It's tragic, really. He used the chaos to rise, and then he ended the chaos by ending all social mobility. But let's talk about his style. Because while he's doing all this bureaucratic lockdown, he's also throwing the biggest, most lavish parties Japan has ever seen.
He was incredibly flamboyant. He was nouveau riche in the most literal sense of the term. He wanted everyone to see just how far he had come, and the ultimate symbol of this was the golden tea room.
Now, I know a little about the Japanese tea ceremony. Isn't it supposed to be about wabi-sabi? Simplicity? Quiet contemplation? Old cracked bowls?
That's the aesthetic his famous tea master, Sen no Riki, promoted. Simplicity and imperfection. But Hideyoshi, he built a portable tea room where the walls, the ceiling, the pillars, everything was covered in gold leaf.
Everything.
Everything. The sliding doors were lined with red gossamer silk that let the light glow through. Even the tea utensils, the whisk, the scoop, they were solid gold.
I'm trying to visualize this. It sounds, well, a bit tacky, maybe, but also just overwhelming.
And that was the point. It was a power move. He would take this portable golden box with him on military campaigns. Imagine being a rival warlord who was invited to a tea ceremony.
You step into this glowing golden space. It tells you two things. I have infinite wealth, and I can literally make the world look however I want it to. Speaking of military campaigns and showing off, We have to talk about the Odawara campaign in 1590. This was the final battle to unify Japan against the powerful Hōjō clan. But the sources describe it less like a siege and more like a festival.
It's one of the most surreal moments in military history. The Hōjō were dug into Odawara Castle, which was a massive, supposedly impregnable fortress. Instead of launching a bloody assault, Hideyoshi just surrounded them with an army of over 200,000 men.
And then just waited them out.
Well, he did more than wait. He brought his concubines, he brought musicians, acrobats, fire eaters. He allowed his generals to bring their wives and families. He set up markets.
So the soldiers inside Odawara Castle are starving, they're stressed out, and they look over the wall and see a party.
They see tea ceremonies and poetry parties happening on the hillsides overlooking their castle.
Oh.
They hear music at night. It was psychological devastation. It sent the message, we aren't even worried about you. We are having a picnic while you slowly starve to death. It completely broke the Hōjō's morale. They surrendered. And with that, in 1590, the unification of Japan was complete. The peasant boy from Nakamura was the master of all Japan.
You'd think that would be the happily ever after. He won. Story's over. But this is where it takes a really dark turn. Up until now, you can sort of root for him. But in his later years, the darker years, he starts to seem unstable, paranoid.
Power does strange things to people. And I think absolute power combined with aging and, crucially, a lack of a direct heir seemed to unravel him. The succession crisis is key here. He was desperate for a son.
He had a nephew, though, right? Toyotomi Hidetsugu.
Yes. For a long time, Hideyoshi didn't have a surviving son. So he adopted his nephew Hidetsugu and made him the Kampaku, his official successor. It was a done deal.
Until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't. Miraculously, in his late 50s, Hideyoshi has a son, Hideyori, with his favorite concubine, Yododono.
And suddenly, the nephew is in the way.
Precisely. And Hideyoshi's solution was monstrous. In 1595, he accused Hidetsugu of treason, almost certainly a fabricated charge. He ordered him to commit suicide. But he didn't stop there. He wanted to wipe the slate completely clean for his new baby boy.
The sources mention a massacre at the Sanjo riverbank in Kyoto. This part is hard to read.
He rounded up Hidetsugu's entire family. We are talking about wives, concubines, and all of his children, 31 people in total. He had them paraded through the streets of Kyoto in open carts. The records say crowds lined the streets just weeping, and then he had them all publicly executed.
That feels different. That's a different person from the Hitotarashi, the charmer we talked about earlier. That isn't a political maneuver. That's just pure tyranny.
It shocked everyone. It showed that Hideyoshi would destroy anything, even his own family, to secure the legacy of his biological son. It was a sign of a leader who was losing his grip.
He also turned on the Christians. Initially, he tolerated them for trade purposes, right?
Yes. But he grew deeply suspicious. He started to see the Jesuit missionaries as the vanguard of European conquest. And there was a specific issue that enraged him: the Portuguese slave trade.
They were selling Japanese people.
Yes, Portuguese merchants were buying Japanese people off of those captured in the wars and shipping them overseas as slaves. Hideyoshi was absolutely furious. He issued the Battle Edict, expelling the missionaries.
But in 1597, this escalated into the incident of the 26 martyrs.
He decided to make an example. He had 26 Christians, a mix of European Franciscan missionaries and Japanese converts, some of them just young boys, marched hundreds of miles to Nagasaki in the middle of winter. And there, on a hill overlooking the bay, he had them crucified.
A brutal warning.
A brutal message. I am the supreme authority here, not your God and not some foreign king.
And while all this domestic terror is happening, he launches a massive foreign war, the Imjin War, the invasion of Korea. Now, looking at the map, this seems insane. Why invade Korea?
This is the ultimate overreach, the final act of hubris. Hideyoshi got it into his head that he could conquer not just Korea, but Ming China. He even talked about conquering India. He wrote letters to the rulers of Taiwan and the Philippines demanding they submit to him.
Talk about ambition creep, from sandal-bearer to would-be conqueror of Asia. But did he actually think he could march through Korea to get to China?
He did. And this is where the diplomatic failure is just staggering. He assumed Korea would simply step aside and grant his armies passage to attack China. When the Koreans refused, he invaded. In 1592, he sent a massive army, 160,000 men, across the sea.
And initially it went well for him, right?
It was a blitzkrieg. The samurai were battle-hardened veterans from decades of civil war. They captured Seoul in a matter of weeks. But then reality set in.
What happened?
The Chinese Ming dynasty sent a massive army to aid Korea. The war on land turned into a brutal stalemate. But the real disaster for the Japanese was at sea.
Admiral Yi Sun-sen. Even I've heard of him. He's a legend.
A naval genius of the highest order. He used his famous turtle ships, Geobuxian. These were ships with covered decks plated with iron spikes to prevent boarding, and they had these fierce dragon heads at the prow that could spew cannon smoke and fire.
They sound terrifying.
They were essentially ironclad, centuries before their time. Admiral Yi used them to systematically annihilate the Japanese Navy and, crucially, cut off Hideyoshi's supply lines. The Japanese army was now stuck in Korea, starving, freezing in the winter, and being constantly picked off by Korean guerrilla fighters.
And the brutality of this war was horrific. I was reading about the Mimizuka in
On
Kyoto.
3-year mound, yes. Because it was too difficult for soldiers to bring back the heads of every enemy they killed to prove their kills and get paid.
They cut off their noses and ears.
They cut off noses and ears, pickled them in barrels of salt, and sent them back to Kyoto. There is still a mound in Kyoto today containing the remains of tens of thousands of Korean and Chinese noses and ears. It was a gruesome, pointless, and incredibly costly war.
There's a quote from Hideyoshi to his commanders that is just haunting. "Don't let my soldiers become spirits in a foreign land."
He realized too late that it was a catastrophe.
Yeah.
But he couldn't pull his troops out without a massive loss of face. So the war just dragged on, draining the Toyotomi clan's resources and prestige right at the moment they needed to be strongest.
And that brings us to the end. The year is 1598. Hideyoshi is dying in Fushimi Castle.
It's a pathetic scene, really. The most powerful man in Japan, this conqueror, lying on his deathbed, absolutely terrified. Not of death, but of what would happen to his son. Hideyori was only 5 years old. Hideyoshi knew the sharks were circling.
He summoned his top generals one last time, right? Including Tokugawa Ieyasu.
He created the Council of Five Elders, made up of the most powerful daimyo in Japan. He made them sign oaths, written in their own blood, swearing to protect his son and rule as a council until Hideyori came of age.
He was begging them.
He was. His last recorded words to them were, "I depend upon you for everything. It is sad to part from you." He was pleading with these wolves to please protect his little lamb.
But the moment he died...
The wolves stopped pretending. They kept his death a secret for a few months to get the troops home from Korea without a total collapse in morale. But as soon as the news was out, the factions formed instantly.
On one side, the bureaucrats loyal to the Toyotomi. On the other,
The military warlords, led by the patient, cunning Tokugawa Ieyasu.
and just 2 years later, in 1600, we get the battle that defines the next era of Japanese history, Sekigahara.
The decisive battle. Ieyasu wins a massive victory. He's named shogun in 1603. He establishes the Tokugawa shogunate. The Toyotomis are pushed to the sideline.
But they weren't wiped out immediately, were they?
No, young Hideyori was allowed to live in the massive Osaka Castle with his mother, but he was a living threat. As he grew into a young man, he became a rallying point for anyone who hated the Tokugawa. So in 1615, Ieyasu decided to finish the job.
The Siege of Osaka.
The final bloody end of the Toyotomi clan.
And that was it, the end of the line.
Complete and total destruction. Osaka Castle was burned to the ground. Hideyori and his mother committed suicide. The male line of the great Toyotomi was extinguished. The dynasty Hideyoshi built, that he executed his own nephew to protect, that he invaded Korea to glorify Het, lasted barely 15 years after his death.
It's just devastating. But let's zoom out. We're at the end of our deep dive. What is the legacy here? Because even though his family line died out, the Japan he built, that remained.
That's the great paradox. The Toyotomi clan failed, but the Toyotomi system succeeded. Tokugawa Ieyasu didn't repeal Hideyoshi's laws. He kept the rigid class system. He kept the travel restrictions. He kept the land surveys. The 250 years of peace under the Tokugawa shogunate were built on the foundation Hideyoshi laid.
So in a way, Hideyoshi did all the dirty work, all the heavy lifting, and Ieyasu just moved into the house he built.
There's an old Japanese saying that sums it up perfectly. Oda Nobunaga pounded the rice cake, Toyotomi Hideyoshi kneaded it, and in the end, Tokugawa Ieyasu sat down and ate it.
That is fantastic and so accurate.
Hideyoshi's true legacy is the structure of early modern Japan. But his personal story is a cautionary tale. He had everything, wealth, absolute power, the golden tea room. But he couldn't secure the one thing that mattered most to a feudal lord, a lasting lineage.
It really makes you wonder, and this is the question I want to leave our listeners with today. We talked about his inferiority complex, his peasant origins. We talked about his boundless ambition. If Hideyoshi had been born a noble, if he had been born into the Minamoto clan and could have become shogun legitimately, Would he have been content?
That's the big what if, isn't it?
Would he have stopped after unifying Japan? Or was that hunger, that need to go on and conquer China and India, was that just fundamentally part of his DNA, regardless of his birth? Was the monkey always destined to reach too far?
I think his ambition was both his superpower and his fatal flaw. Being an outsider made him work harder, smarter, and be more creative than anyone else. But it also meant he never, ever felt secure. He always had to prove more. And in the end, that need for more is what broke him and his legacy.
A fascinating, incredible, and ultimately tragic story of a self-made king. That's a wrap for this deep dive into the life of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Stay curious.